Imagine that your best friend, who comes from a wealthy family, hires you to scare off the suitors her father finds. Your partnership has lasted for years, but it was shattered on your last date with a guy who was looking for a fiancé, because when you arrived to introduce yourself with your best friend's identity, you realized that it was the CEO of the company where you work. And now, what could happen to your career if he finds out the truth? I'm Lancelot, and in today's recap we'll be watching Business Proposal. The story begins with our protagonist at work in a large food company called GoFood. Hari has to interrupt what she's doing to go to an opening with her team. The event doesn't necessarily require her presence, but it's good that everyone is there, as the president, Kang, who has been abroad for 2 years, will be returning to continue his business in Korea, and few of the staff know him. But when it was time for everyone to receive his words from the stage, it didn't happen as they had hoped, as the man simply didn't show up, but his secretary in his place, called Sung-hoon. Meanwhile, President Kang, who we will also refer to as Tae-moo, went to a golf course, where Mr. Park was, a gentleman who wanted to take President Kang's job for himself. And deciding not to waste any time, Tae-moo reveals to him that he knows that the man has been accepting bribes in exchange for signing dubious contracts, and even his mistress was involved, so he warns him that he will keep an eye on his actions from now on. In the next scene, we see that the protagonist has received a message from the man she likes, as today is her birthday. He has asked Hari to go to his work to receive a present after work. On the way, the protagonist calls her best friend and tells her where she's going, so young Seo gets excited and raises the protagonist's hopes, saying that he believes she'll get a necklace and that it might even be time for him to realize how much Hari likes him, which could end up with them being together. However, unfortunately that wasn't the case at all. Min-woo gave her friend a pair of tickets to the concert of her favorite singer and left a note on the back telling her to bring someone she liked, but that it should be a man and not her best friend, as usual. Although the protagonist knows that her feelings aren't reciprocated, she's a little upset because there's still hope that one day Min-woo will look at her differently. Meanwhile, President Kang confronts his grandfather, who is very angry that his grandson didn't show up for the inauguration. He decides that the time is right to tell Tae-moo that he's going to suspend him from work until he finds a wife to marry, because for Daegu, the time has come. And his grandson won't even have to worry about looking for suitable wives, as he's already made a list of the best on the business market. Since President Kang doesn't have much choice and wants to go back to doing his job without bothering, he accepts, and his grandfather arranges to meet the first woman on the list. Returning to the protagonist, her family has an establishment where they sell fried chicken and end up getting stressed out when they're at the end of the working day because of a neighbor. Hari, who was already stressed out, ends up lashing out with the force she uses against the man and results in his license plate, among other things, being smashed, so the protagonist is responsible for paying him a very large sum for the damage, something she doesn't have at the moment. The next day, Hari goes to lunch with her friend and an opportunity presents itself. Young Seo's family has a lot of money and they want to marry off their daughter to someone who has the same or better quality of life, but this is not the woman's wish, as she only wants to get married when it comes to love. So when young Seo receives word from his father that he's going on a blind date that same day, he offers her a sum of money, the same as Hari needs, so that she'll go in his place and dismiss the man. In the next scene, we see her all dressed up waiting at the meeting place. After the man arrives and they exchange business cards, Hari realizes that he is her boss, and now despair begins to strike the woman. However, she decides to use all her knowledge of how to dismiss a man to leave as quickly as possible, but nothing seems to have any effect on President Kang. At least what reassures her is that as she is not a prominent person in the company, there is no way he will recognize her. Hari used her last idea of inviting him to a room, thinking that the man would dismiss her as too forward, but he didn't, and Tae-moo actually went for one. By this time, the protagonist was almost freaking out, because she didn't want to go that far with it, especially as her job was still at stake, and what saved her was a woman who came to fight with her. This woman accuses her of having gone out with her husband earlier because she was wearing the same clothes as her mistress, and, although she denied it at first, Hari decided to use this to her advantage, but she wasn't able to drive President Kang away like that either. However, the protagonist then runs off to get a cab, because the betrayed woman is chasing her again. Later, in the car, President Kang receives a call from his grandfather and decides to reveal that there will be no need for any more meetings, as he is going to marry Young Seo, and even Secretary Sung Hoon is startled. In fact, Tae-moo has decided to do this in order to put an end to the meetings and all this wasted time. This is not good news for the real Young Seo, who freaks out when her father calls her to tell her the news. And the protagonist also starts to think about the problems that could arise for her if the president finds out that the woman he left, thinking she was someone else, is actually his employee. But Young Seo calms her down by saying that it's practically impossible for Hari to bump into the chairman inside the huge company. However, the next day it happened and the protagonist did everything she could to prevent him from seeing her face. So, as soon as she has a little time to spare, she calls Young Seo and asks her friend to resolve the situation immediately. And seeing Young Seo now, the woman ended up falling in love with a man she bumped into, who turns out to be Sung Hoon, President Kang's secretary, but Young Seo doesn't know that yet. In the next scene, we see the friends together and once again Hari goes to meet President Kang to try to get him to leave, as the man has called Young Seo asking to talk. At the meeting, the protagonist makes it clear that she wants nothing to do with Tae-moo and hopes that this will be enough for him to drop the whole marriage thing. However, fate is really funny, and as soon as she leaves the establishment, Hari spots Min-woo nearby, and so that the man doesn't see her dressed like that, she ends up getting into a car to hide from him. And the irony is that the car the woman gets into is President Kang's car. Now that they're back together, before she leaves, the man asks her why she doesn't want to marry him, and she replies that he says a lot of cheesy, strange things and looks like an Archaeopteryx. Tae-moon wonders what this animal would look like, and as soon as his secretary shows it to him, the man expresses that he doesn't like the comparison, even though Sung Hoon says that there is a strange resemblance between them. The next day, something annoying happens to the protagonist. She finds out that her coworker is seeing Min-woo, and when she learns that they are meeting in the company lobby, she decides to go down to spy on them. And as if that wasn't enough, as soon as she's on her way back to her floor, she comes across President Kang getting out of the elevator, so, in order not to be recognized, she turns around and runs, but this causes her to bump into someone else and end up falling. The slipper worn by the staff flies off the protagonist's foot and into Chairman Kang's face, and instead of apologizing, she just runs away even faster when she realizes what has just happened. Tae-moo doesn't stand still either and goes after the employee, so they end up meeting in another elevator on the other side of the company. Despite being angry with the woman, the man understands when she explains that she didn't mean it and returns the flying slipper to the protagonist. As he does so, he notices her badge and realizes that she is an employee who has one of the best suggestions for projects, which has made him record her name. That said, he takes the opportunity to praise Hari's ideas, and this cheers up the downcast woman, but she still doesn't show her face to him. In the next scene, we see the protagonist with her team and things start to get happier for her, as she discovers that Min-woo has actually shown up at the company to explain to her colleague that he only wanted friendship, not a relationship as she believed was about to happen. Young Seo ends up meeting the man she had fallen in love with again, but in a rather uncomfortable way, as the vehicles almost hit each other, and when the woman gives him her business card to call him, she ends up being scolded for using a false name. At this point, Young Seo discovers that her crush works for President Kang and is forced to tell him the whole situation, but not the whole truth, as he says that her relationship with the woman he hired to go on the date was not one of friendship, but more of an acquaintance. And not trusting the woman's words very much, Tae-moo says he'll leave her alone if she makes this hired woman show up on a date to apologize for lying to him. Young Seo didn't know how to make this happen and was sure that if she talked to the protagonist about it, she would never want to go on the date, so she decided to take her friend to a store to buy clothes and then arrange for them to go out to eat at an establishment. There, Young Seo told her the truth when President Kang was minutes away and then left the establishment, leaving Hari in despair. The protagonist had to hastily put on the wig she wore to the meetings, and because of this, she ended up dropping her handbag on the floor, which caused her family's restaurant cards to scatter. That said, when President Kang arrived, he took one of the cards and said that he would keep it so that he would know where to find her if he needed her. Then he asked her to add him to her contacts and to answer whenever the man called her, otherwise he would go after her at her family's restaurant. To end the meeting, Taemoon asks Hari for her real name and, in order not to use her own, as he would recognize her since he knew about her projects, she uses one that is the same as a character from a very famous soap opera at the moment. And President Kang was once again forced to go to meetings because of his grandfather, who wasted no time in finding out that his grandson was no longer going to marry Young Seo. So at the end of the day, exhausted from traveling everywhere to meet new women, he decides to tell his grandfather that he already has one he wants to marry and that he will introduce her soon. Chairman Kang lied that he dated her for a while and they were separated when he met Young Seo, but now they've decided to get back together and the man believes she's the one. Daegu doesn't trust his grandson at first, so he asks his secretary if the man is telling the truth, and when Sung-hoon confirms it, he asks to see her at the weekend. So, the only one who can save him and owes him is the protagonist, so the two arranged to meet in another city at an establishment, because the woman didn't want him to suspect that she was very close to him. At the meeting, President Kang proposes that they date and get married as a lie, just so that his grandfather doesn't bother him anymore, and as well as her being under pressure to accept for having cheated on him before, Taemoo offers to double the amount his friend had paid him to help him out. So Hari accepts, and over the next few days they even sign a contract, which states that if she doesn't comply with the requirements, she will have to pay a fine of 100 times the amount she will receive. And the protagonist is also given a lesson in the things she'll have to memorize for her meetings with Taemoon's grandfather. She's also given a story for herself, because as the man breathes work every second of the day, the easiest way to invent that they met is to use the time he spent in New York. In the next scene, when she's at her parents' restaurant, the protagonist receives a call from Minwoo asking her to come and see him again, as she seems to have disappeared over the last few days, and Hari promises that she'll show up whenever she can. Now we see her with her best friend. The two talk about Chairman Kang and the whole situation that's going on. The protagonist comments that she's found out that his parents died in an accident, and Young Seo adds that he's heard some rumors, which is why there are no other family members in the company apart from them, because it seems that the accident was planned and to protect his grandson. His grandfather fired everyone in the family who worked for him. Later, Chairman Kang asks to meet the protagonist to practice her knowledge of him, and when she tries to come up with a story of how they met, we see the man angry that Hari said it was a rainy day, because for some reason, the man hates rainy days. The next day, Young Seo is having breakfast with her father, when he decides to tell her that he's set her up on another blind date. Tired of it all, the woman replies that she doesn't want to get married like that, and if she has to leave the house to get him to stop, fine. Her father has therefore warned her that if her daughter goes down this road, she'll have to leave her black card with him, and although she doesn't like the idea, the woman goes ahead with her move. Meanwhile, at the protagonist's work, the boss they were working for is in trouble, so they'll have to find another one, and as Hari knows Minwoo's track record and his professionalism, she recommends him. Her team leader loved the idea and asked the protagonist to put together a presentation by the next day, so that Mrs. Yeo could present it to President Kang at the next meeting. So Hari spent the night focusing on it, and the next day delivered as promised. She explained it in detail to her leader, adding photos to the dishes and even posting it on the restaurant's social networks, which made Mrs. Yeo proud of her employee and also make a decision to drag her to the meeting with Chairman Kang, because no one could explain it better than her. Although the protagonist tried to avoid being recognized, she didn't have much choice, so she wore a mask over her face and pretended to be sick so she wouldn't take it off, so Taemoo wouldn't realize it was his fake girlfriend. And since the performance was so good, Hari goes out into the night excited to tell Minwoo. However, As soon as she arrives at the restaurant, she finds a romantic table set up and her lover is having fun with someone from his past, which even makes our protagonist surprised to see her and run off saying that she can talk to her friend another time. While waiting for her bus, Hari even receives a message from Min-woo explaining that he wishes he had told her earlier that he was back with URA, and we discover that this woman was the man's girlfriend a few years ago. The protagonist had always liked him, even though she knew he would only have eyes for her beloved, and she decided to continue her friendship in order to have him around. So when the two broke up after a while together, Hari thought he might develop something for her, but today the woman realizes that nothing will come of it and all her expectations are gone. To make matters worse, when the protagonist got up to catch her bus, she bumped into someone and her things fell to the ground, but the worst thing was her cell phone, which fell into the manhole and ended up answering President Kang's call. Upset and disillusioned, Hari can't hold back her tears any longer and lays it all out, which causes the man to listen to the woman in the background. However, the next day Tae-moo pretends not to have heard and the meeting with his grandfather goes perfectly well. The only problem arose between President Kang and the protagonist, as she made up another story involving a rainy day and this put him off, asking her to just agree with what his grandfather and he would say from now on. Meanwhile, we discover that the apartment Young Seo has moved into is right next door to Sung-hoon's. Returning to the couple and their grandfather, Daegu was helping the protagonist pick up her belongings, when the object fell to the floor and he ended up seeing the tickets for the concert she had won for Min-woo's birthday. So knowing how his grandson is a workaholic, the gentleman says that Tae-moo won't escape and will accompany his girlfriend to the concert, and Daegu even makes a point of taking them to the venue and watching them until they get inside. Once in Young Seo's apartment, the woman comes across a cockroach and Sung-hoo screams to help her, at which point she discovers that they are neighbors and is overjoyed at the news. After long minutes, the man, who is also disgusted by the insect, manages to finish it off, and when he is invited by Young Seo to do something and get to know each other, Sung-hoon dismisses her because he doesn't think it's right to get involved with the woman who deceived his boss. Back to the protagonist, in the middle of the show, the duo reads a story and sings the song that was requested. Then one of the songs they pick up talks about a man who has had a friendship for 7 years with a very loyal woman and who has bought the tickets so that she can go to see the show with a person who deserves her, that being his wish. The lead singer says the numbers of the seats and the light goes up to Hari and President Kang, then the song that was requested begins to play and the protagonist can't hold back her tears. Tae-moon reaches for a handkerchief for her, and after the show the two talk about her relationship with this friend. It seems that Hari is finally going to put an end to her feelings for him and move on. Afterwards, the two go for a bite to eat at one of those street stalls, and at one point, the protagonist has to answer the phone, and while she's talking, she ends up being hit by a baseball and her eye is already showing signs of turning purple. So President Kang buys some ice for Hari to compress it so that it doesn't swell up so much, and while they're sitting down, the protagonist suggests that he try dating someone else for real, because in the long run this could be good for him, but if the man continues with a fake relationship, he won't have any future and it could even be a big waste of time. Soon afterwards, Hari says goodbye as her cab has arrived and gives Tae-moo a present she won at the concert, to comfort him in case he ever gets sad. The next day, the protagonist needs to put a bandage on her eye, so that President Kang won't recognize her because of her bruise. However, when she's in the elevator fixing the bandage, the man enters and Hari is startled, dropping the object on the floor. However, she managed to pick it up before President Kang could recognize her. Upon hearing that he would be attending the tasting event, which she had included Min-woo in, she made an excuse to her team about having a stomach issue and hid in the bathroom. Despite her efforts, Hari's presence was mentioned at the event, as everyone credited the dish Tae-moo liked the most, which Min-woo prepared, to the protagonist's idea. Once again, her attempt to avoid being recognized by her boss failed. That evening, Hari went out for dinner with Min-woo to celebrate the success of his dish. Since Young Seo was running late, Min-woo took the opportunity to ask Hari about the concert tickets he had given her. He was surprised to learn that she had taken a guy instead of her best friend, especially since she hadn't mentioned it. Luckily, Young Seo's delay allowed her to spot President Kang entering the restaurant. She tried to call Hari to warn her, but by then, Hari had already noticed him and his secretary, allowing her to slip away unnoticed. Min-woo mentioned to Tae-moo that Hari was at the restaurant, prompting the chef to call her to find out where she had gone. Hari made up an excuse that Min-woo believed. However, because of the call, President Kang recognized the ringtone Hari had set, which was the same song his fake girlfriend cried to at the concert they attended together. In the next scene, we see the two friends together, and Young Seo tells Hari that the president's secretary is her neighbor. This means they can't meet at her place with Hari dressed normally, to avoid suspicion from Tae-moo. Throughout the conversation, Young Seo begins to suspect that her friend is slowly falling for President Kang. Back at Min-woo's restaurant, Tae-moo questions the chef and learns that he and Hari have known each other for 7 years, the same duration his fake girlfriend mentioned about overcoming a friend. The next day, Tae-moo's grandfather discovered that his grandson and his girlfriend would celebrate 1 year together over the weekend. Wanting him to marry soon, he insisted on a celebration and made a reservation at a restaurant for them. Despite Tae-moo's busy schedule, his secretary expected him to be annoyed by the changes. However, Tae-moo seemed pleased to meet his fake girlfriend. Meanwhile, Hari went on a trip with her office colleagues to shoot a commercial for the company. Tae-moo's grandfather showed up to check on his employees' progress. Hari tried her best to avoid him, but at one point, he found her phone, which had been left ringing on a bench. Hari had to retrieve it, hiding her face with her hair to avoid recognition, and grabbed the phone without saying thank you. Meanwhile, President Kang realized that his fake girlfriend's ringtone was the same as the one that played when Min-woo called Hari, leading him to think the song was popular. Back to Hari, she answered the call in the only bathroom available, and Tae-moo arranged a meeting for the weekend. During this time, Tae-moo's grandfather began feeling unwell, so he headed to the bathroom, which was occupied by Hari. Realizing who wanted to use it, Hari went back inside, forcing the elderly man to use all his strength to open the door, only to fall into a nearby water basin. As a result, the grandfather had to leave the location with a bit of aversion towards Hari. In the next scene, we see Young Seo making friends with another neighbor who accidentally received her mail. Despite this new man in her life, she couldn't stop thinking about Sung-hoon. We then see Tae-moo accompanying his grandfather to a clinic for a checkup after the fall. President Kang left with a tonic his grandfather had made for his fake girlfriend, so he went directly to meet Hari. In addition to the tonic, Tae-moo gave her an ointment for the bruise on her eye, possibly indicating his growing feelings for her. However, Hari made a misstep by asking if his grandfather was badly hurt, as President Kang hadn't mentioned the incident to her. Nevertheless, he didn't pay much attention to it. In the following scene, we see the two on their weekend date, supposedly celebrating their 1-year anniversary. The day turned out to be quite pleasant, and they seemed to grow closer. Of course, the money added a touch of charm, as President Kang took her to an expensive lunch, followed by shopping at a luxury store for Hari, and ending the day watching fireworks together. Meanwhile, Young Seo went to the gym, where Sung-hoon and her recently befriended neighbor were also present. The friendly neighbor even helped her with her workout, and despite claiming he felt nothing for her, Sung-hoon kept a close eye on them. In the locker room, something left Sung-hoon intrigued. He, like the neighbor, wore glasses, but when asked for the time, the neighbor easily read the clock on the wall without his glasses, whereas Sung-hoon couldn't see much beyond the man's face. This led the secretary to question why the neighbor wore glasses if he seemingly didn't need them. The scene cuts to the neighbor giving Young Seo a gift, a lamp he made for her, suggesting she put it in her bedroom as it suited the environment. This struck me as odd, setting off my strange situation radar. Returning to the protagonist, upon arriving home and storing the gift from her fake boyfriend, Hari discovered that the photo they took together at the restaurant was included in the gift bag, and she was thrilled to have this keepsake. However, as good things are short-lived, she accidentally left her wallet in President Kang's vehicle. When he returned to her address to return it, he noticed Min Woo calling her Hari in front of her family's establishment. Tae-moo decided to check her ID in the wallet, discovering her secret. In the end, President Kang didn't return the wallet to Hari and simply left it in front of the restaurant, where her brother fortunately found it. At home, Tae-moo began to realize all the clues the protagonist had given that he could have noticed earlier, indicating she wasn't who she claimed to be and explaining why Hari always hid her face. From that moment, President Kang was determined to spend his time making the protagonist's life difficult until she realized he knew her secret. This meant that in the coming days, Hari would be very tired in both her professional and personal life. At one point, the secretary even spoke to Tae-moo about how he had been treating the protagonist, leading Tae-moo to reveal Hari's secret to him, leaving the secretary in shock. President Kang bothered Hari so much that when she was dressed as his girlfriend, he invited her to a company ceremony. When she was his employee, he informed her she would receive an award as a standout in her area, which would be presented on the ceremony day. He did this to see how she would handle the situation or which persona she would choose to attend as. Either way, if she didn't attend as his girlfriend, there was a hefty penalty for breaching the contract. If she didn't attend to receive the award, it would seem strange, as it's something no one would miss. It's a complicated situation for our Hari. However, things weren't easy for young Seo either. When she tried to be nice to Sung-hoon, he drew an imaginary line and asked her not to cross it. President Kang ended up being in the building at the same time as Hari, although each was at their friend's place. During a conversation between the secretary and Tae-moo, Sung-hoon mentioned that the protagonist might have lied out of fear of telling the truth and being fired from the company. Therefore, the secretary believed it was time for him to forgive her, as Hari was an excellent employee. The next day, we see the protagonist removing the gift young Seo received from the neighbor and placing it in her friend's living room as decoration. Returning to President Kang's plan, to ensure the protagonist attended the ceremony, he sent flowers to her family's home, inviting everyone to the event. Now Hari couldn't pretend to be sick or anything like that to avoid going. With the situation becoming complicated for the protagonist, she ended up drinking a bit too much when dining with her colleagues. This resulted in her calling President Kang while drunk. However, during their conversation, something seemed to happen to Hari. When she stopped answering Tae-moo's calls, he decided to find her to ensure she was okay. He found the protagonist sleeping on a slide in a children's playground. She was so out of it that she thought President Kang wasn't really there and that it was a dream. This led Hari to reveal her secret and apologize for lying. Hearing her brother calling her in the background, Tae-moo decided to leave her there and hide, so she would think it was a dream. The next day, when Hari woke up, she found a note that eased her worries. President Kang had written a message telling her she no longer needed to continue the charade of being his girlfriend. Meanwhile, Tae-moo went on a last-minute business trip, thinking he had no feelings for the protagonist. He believed that seeing her for so long had caused this strange feeling, and some time away would do him good. However, President Kang found himself thinking about Hari the entire time he was away. Apparently, he forgot to inform his grandfather that he had ended the relationship, as the elder called the protagonist to invite her to dinner. Not wanting to cause trouble for Tae-moo, she accepted. Later, we see young Seo at home, accidentally breaking the gift she received from the neighbor. When this happened, she discovered a hidden camera in the lamp. Frightened, young Seo gathered all the evidence to take to the police. However, while waiting for a taxi, the neighbor came down to the front of the building and picked up the bag she had dropped in her haste. He said he would keep the gift to fix it. At that moment, the secretary arrived, immediately sensing something was wrong. When he approached them, the neighbor fled with the bag. Sung-hoon chased after him, but the neighbor disposed of the hidden camera along the way. Although he managed to apprehend the neighbor, the crucial evidence was missing. At the police station, the secretary received a call from Tae-moo, inviting him to dinner with his grandfather. Sung-hoon explained where he was and what had happened. When the protagonist arrived, Tae-moo forgot any resentment he felt and told her to get in the car, informing her about what had happened to her best friend. President Kang called Hari by her name, and she realized he knew her secret. However, there were more pressing matters that needed attention. At the police station, the two friends watched the footage the man had recorded of them. Fortunately, it wasn't anything too serious, thanks to the protagonist placing the object in the living room. Despite the concerning situation, the neighbor would only receive a fine, as the law wasn't as strict as it should be in these cases. At home, after things had calmed down, Hari began to realize her life had been chaotic in recent days because Tae-moo knew the truth about her. Meanwhile, Tae-moo pursued the neighbor and decided to investigate further to see if there were more grounds to keep him in custody. It turned out the situation was much more significant than Tae-moo had imagined. First, he bought the company the neighbor worked for, then decided to fire him for filming women without their consent. He also planned to file a lawsuit against him, supporting each victim in pressing charges, and wouldn't stop until the man was behind bars. Through this ordeal, President Kang realized he had feelings for her, so he decided to ask her to meet after work and planned to propose to her, with a future leading to marriage. His secretary even tried to convince him to take it slow to see if she felt the same way, but Tae-moo didn't listen. Regardless, President Kang's plan didn't go as intended. During dinner, the protagonist prepared a presentation showing how she was a valuable employee and tried to convince him not to fire her. The mood was completely disrupted, and Tae-moo didn't bring up the topic of dating. The next day, President Kang talked to Sung-hoon about his frustration that she didn't see him as a romantic interest. The secretary suggested she might still be interested in Min-woo, meaning Tae-moo would have to win her over. Meanwhile, Young Seo and the protagonist celebrated with their friends when Min-woo appeared on TV. At the gathering, Ura started picking on Hari after hearing her friends comment that they thought Min-woo would never get back with her and would end up dating the protagonist. To protect her friend, Young Seo mentioned how Hari's new boyfriend was tall, handsome, and rich. However, Ura thought she was lying and even commented that the protagonist's standards were too high and that she should lower them. I believe what made Ura insecure was seeing Min-woo a bit upset when he heard Hari was dating, even though it was a lie. Later, we see that Young Seo was traumatized by being filmed without her knowledge, so she avoided certain things, like not using restrooms in restaurants, at work, etc. The next day, President Kang began executing his plan to win over the protagonist. He arranged for her to stay at the company, but she would have to help develop a new product, working after hours. In reality, Tae-moo rented a cinema room just for the two of them, using the excuse that the movie was related to what they would be developing. However, things didn't go as planned. The protagonist's team leader was also at the cinema with another colleague, and they ended up watching the movie with her. President Kang discreetly left the room to avoid being seen, as it would have been embarrassing to explain why he was alone in a cinema with Hari, especially since they weren't in a romantic relationship. Meanwhile, Young Seo was waiting at the bus stop with a full bladder. Sung-hoon passed by and offered her a ride. However, after spending some time in traffic, Young Seo had to get out of the vehicle, as she was about to relieve herself right there. She ran into an establishment, but when she tried to open the restroom doors, they were locked. The secretary, not understanding what was happening, parked the car and followed Young Seo. Seeing her in distress, he forced the bathroom door open so she could relieve herself. The next day, President Kang looked for an excuse to spend more time with the protagonist and invented a business trip. Taimur researched Hari's likes on social media and planned every moment, but he didn't boast about it, acting as if everything was a coincidence to maintain the magic of the moment. At one point, they seemed to connect, and the protagonist shared her dream of creating a brand to sell tasty frozen foods. Since her parents always worked hard, frozen meals were her favorite way to satisfy her hunger, and she wanted to offer that to others, as not everyone can eat at restaurants daily. Meanwhile, young Seo was drinking alone at a restaurant when Sung-hoon arrived and sat beside her. Despite their ongoing story of not crossing each other's line, he was concerned about her drinking. Later, when she was leaving, the secretary followed her home. Unable to hold her tongue after drinking too much, young Seo confessed her feelings for him, leading to the couple's first kiss. Returning to the protagonist, a situation arose with her and Taimur. We already know the man hates rainy days, and unfortunately, on the way back, they encountered several storm clouds, causing the light in his face to disappear. President Kang pulled over and asked Hari to get out, leaving her in the rain and in the middle of nowhere, with walking as her only option to reach a place, as her phone was also out of battery. He did this so she wouldn't witness him having an anxiety attack triggered by rainy days, related to his parents' accident. Once the rain passed, he calmed down, but the protagonist was no longer where he had left her, and now President Kang was desperate to find her. Hari managed to reach a hotel, where she was allowed to dry off and charge her phone. At the reception, she encountered her friends, or rather supposed friends, as they seemed like snakes. The trio started picking on Hari, asking if she was there with her supposed rich boyfriend and wanting to see him to know if he was real. Embarrassed and wanting to go home, the protagonist was about to speak when President Kang interrupted. He appeared out of nowhere, calling her love, and then introduced himself to the trio of women as Hari's boyfriend. President Kang had discovered the protagonist's whereabouts by calling her phone, which was answered by the hotel receptionist. Upon arriving, he overheard the three women putting Hari in a tough spot and quickly decided to act as her boyfriend. Following President Kang's grand entrance, URA suggested they all have dinner together, which Taimur readily accepted. During the meal, he made an effort to convince the women that he and Hari were indeed a couple. Although Hari initially didn't want to perpetuate the lie, she changed her mind after hearing the women speak ill of her. We know that URA's insecurity stems from her jealousy over Minwoo's feelings for the protagonist. Imagine her reaction upon discovering that Hari's new boyfriend was the president of the company where she worked. Her jealousy turned into envy. Later, the fake couple had to share a room to avoid raising suspicions. The next day, Taimur sent a rack of clothes for Hari to choose from, as it would be suspicious for her to wear the same outfit as the day before. Meanwhile, young Seo woke up in Sung-hoon's apartment, unable to remember what happened the previous night. Her only memory was that they kissed and then went to his place, but everything else was a blur. Embarrassed and not wanting to cross the boundaries he had set, she asked him to forget everything that happened and left before Mr. Cha could express his feelings. Back to the protagonist, Minwoo joined the group for lunch. After the meal, President Kang received a call about returning to the company to handle some matters. However, upon hearing Minwoo ask Hari to stay and not accompany Taimur, President Kang decided to rearrange his schedule to stay with them. Later, they spent the rest of the day on a boat owned by Taimur's grandfather. At one point, Minwoo had a private conversation with President Kang, questioning why he had chosen Hari among so many options that were surely more suitable for him. President Kang's response was applause-worthy, as he told Minwoo not to dare say that the protagonist wasn't suitable for him due to her lack of wealth or status, as she was perfect just as she was. Tension between the two began to build, especially after the girls suggested a fishing competition, leading the men to compete over who could catch more fish. Unfortunately, the fun was cut short when Hari began feeling unwell, prompting them to return to shore and for President Kang to take her to the hospital. Later, near Hari's home, Taimur apologized for being selfish and focusing too much on competing with Minwoo, failing to notice her discomfort. Taking advantage of the moment, Taemu decided it was time to confess his feelings to Hari, adding that although she might be surprised, she could take all the time she needed to respond. However, the next day, President Kang grew anxious from not receiving a response from the protagonist, and this continued for several days. That night, Young Seo and Sung Hoon crossed paths in the condominium parking lot, where he took the opportunity to express his feelings, explaining that he felt the same way since he first saw her. Their conversation ended at Mr. Cha's house, where Young Seo confessed that her behavior was due to not remembering the night they spent together. In response, he assured her that this time, he wouldn't let her forget. Returning to the protagonist, a week after Taemu's confession, she still hadn't responded. Hari was selected to film a company advertising campaign. Upon seeing the cast, Taemu decided to visit the location to watch her from a distance. However, he couldn't contain his jealousy when he saw the protagonist with Minwoo. Noticing his presence, Hari accidentally stained her clothes, prompting a break so she could clean up in the restroom. Upon exiting, she encountered Taemu. Both were tense in each other's presence, and the situation grew more chaotic when Sung Hoon informed President Kang that his grandfather was approaching and looking for him. Taemu quickly took Hari's hand and led her elsewhere. This turned out to be beneficial, as it allowed them to talk more openly. Despite sharing a kiss, Hari told him to return to blind dates, believing everyone would find it strange for him to date an employee. Taemu's response was that he didn't care, he would keep asking her out until she was willing to try. This led to them dining together, as President Kang insisted she owed him for kissing him without intending to get seriously involved. As an alternative, he suggested they kiss again, but Hari dismissed the idea. However, at the end of the dinner, instead of the protagonist paying as agreed, he covered the expenses, opening the door for them to go out together once more for her to make it up to him. It's becoming clear that Hari is also developing feelings for Taemu, as her heart races whenever she sees him. Meanwhile, Yura's jealousy over Minwoo's feelings for Hari continues to grow. Her insecurity intensifies after reading comments on the viral advertising video, where many remarked that the two looked like a couple. In the next scene, director Jin, Young Seo's superior's mother and aunt, greeted Taemu's grandfather at a restaurant. Knowing that her niece had rejected his grandson, she proposed a blind date between President Kang and her daughter, Yoo-jong. Returning to the protagonist, Taemu asked her to spend the day with him at an amusement park as repayment, bringing them closer together. At one point, President Kang opened up while they ate corn dogs, sharing that he used to eat them with his parents and that the taste reminded him of happy moments with them. He confided that Hari was different, as she was the only one he could talk to about those he missed in a light-hearted manner. She didn't act awkward or walk on eggshells, she simply behaved normally, which comforted him. However, their outing was cut short when the protagonist had to leave to meet her parents, who had been hospitalized. Her mother had burned her arm while cooking, and her father needed emergency surgery for acute appendicitis. Of course, Taemu wouldn't leave Hari alone in such a situation. He ensured her parents were comfortably accommodated in the hospital, though Hari fibbed a bit about him. President Kang had to pretend to be a 40-year-old colleague of Hari's, and I'm curious how she'll untangle this lie in the future. Meanwhile, Minwoo helped out at Hari's family restaurant but accidentally dropped some dishes, cutting his finger in the process. Ha-min told him there were bandages in the protagonist's room, and while retrieving them, he found the contract Hari had signed with Taemu to pretend to be his girlfriend. With his mind racing, Minwoo left the restaurant and, after seeing President Kang talking to the protagonist and asking for a kiss, decided he had to free her from this situation. He approached and punched Taemu in the face. Confused by the altercation, the protagonist separated the two and asked President Kang to head home safely while she returned Minwoo to the restaurant. There, Hari explained to him that it was none of his business whether she was in a fake relationship with the president or not, it was her concern alone. She added that Minwoo should apologize to Tae-moo for his behavior when they next met. The following day, Young Seo visited President Kang's company and delivered something she had prepared for Sung-hoon to share with the team. They parted with a kiss, which Tae-moo witnessed. Although President Kang had been tricked by Young Seo regarding the blind date, he was only upset that Mr. Cha hadn't told him, as they were best friends and should share such things. A bigger issue soon arose for Tae-moo. His grandfather accepted director Jin's proposal and arranged a date between his grandson and her daughter. He informed President Kang about it, advising him to go so things wouldn't worsen for him. Meanwhile, Hari participated in a company team-building event, where the winning team would receive a trophy and dinner with Tae-moo. Despite injuring her wrist during a match, she didn't let it affect her and gave her all to win, driven by jealousy at the thought of her beloved with another woman. In the end, the protagonist achieved her goal, but when she went to celebrate with her team, she was disappointed to learn that President Kang wouldn't attend due to a scheduled date with another woman. After a few drinks, acting on impulse, Hari mustered the courage to call Tae-moo from a taxi, asking him to leave the date because she was in love with him. She accepted his previous proposal, regardless of what others might think. In reality, President Kang hadn't gone on the date. He sent Sung-hoon in his place and was waiting outside Hari's house. Due to traffic, it took her a while to arrive, so they both got out of their cars and met on a bridge, where they officially became a couple. The next day, Tae-moo picked Hari up for a date before work. They visited a popular local restaurant, where he prepared a lovely breakfast for her and noticed she was wearing mismatched shoes. He found it endearing, as Hari had gotten ready so quickly to see him that she hadn't noticed the detail. As a result, she received a gift at her office, a delivery of a beautiful new pair of heels from her boyfriend, sparking curiosity among her colleagues. However, Hari brushed it off, saying it was just Young Seo playing a prank on her. Meanwhile, Tae-moo and Sung-hoon embarked on a business trip abroad. There, we discovered that Mr. Cha had gotten into a predicament. Yoo-jong wasn't bothered by President Kang's absence at the blind date. Instead, she developed a crush on the secretary and wouldn't stop messaging him. Despite Sung-hoon making it clear he had a girlfriend and no interest in her, Yoo-jong wasn't deterred. Upon leaving her company, she encountered Young Seo and claimed to be dating someone. Responding to the provocation, Young Seo also said she was dating, unaware that they were referring to the same person. The next day, Hari and Minwoo were set to participate in an interview together, as their video had been a social media hit. Before the recording, Minwoo apologized for his previous behavior, and the protagonist revealed that she and President Kang were now dating. She added that, as he had mentioned before, there was a good chance it might not work out, but they were willing to try. That night, Sung-hoon faced his problem when he arrived home to find Yoo-jong at his door, slightly intoxicated. He helped her recover and sent her on her way, but in the process, he cancelled plans with his girlfriend, claiming President Kang needed his help at home. We know that starting a lie rarely ends well. Meanwhile, the main couple grew closer, enjoying the early stages of their relationship. The next day, the cousins discussed relationships, which was odd given their mutual dislike. However, Yoo-jong insisted Young Seo listen, as she had no friends. Yoo-jong shared her romantic disappointments and rejections. Out of pity, I believe, her cousin encouraged her to pursue the man, explaining that persistence had helped her secure her current boyfriend. I felt sorry for Young Seo, as she had no idea who the man was. In the next scene, Ura and Minwoo's relationship began to crumble once more, and this time, it might be for good. Ura wanted them to meet her parents over the weekend, believing they were ready to set a wedding date. However, Minwoo responded that he wasn't prepared for such a commitment and postponed the meeting with her parents. Now, let's return to President Kang's company, where Yoo-jong once again made a blunder. She visited to apologize for her actions the previous night. By speaking too much, she revealed to the arriving grandfather that Tae-moo hadn't shown up for the date. she quickly left to let them sort it out. In the elevator, while scolding his grandsons, the elder felt his stomach acting up, prompting him to ask Tae-moo to stop on the next floor, which happened to be Hari's. Meanwhile, Hari arrived at the office to see her leaders rushing into the men's restroom. Curious about the commotion, she followed them, only for them to rush out, inadvertently knocking her to the ground. As she composed herself to get up, she overheard President Kang and his grandfather and quickly hid in a restroom stall. However, she left her shoe outside, prompting the elder to knock on the stall, demanding to know why a woman was in the men's restroom. With no other choice, Hari emerged, once again finding herself in an awkward situation with Tae-moo's grandfather, further souring his opinion of her. We shouldn't forget that this time, the awkward situation arose due to the team leaders. Having put the protagonist in a difficult position, they decided to be honest and reveal their relationship. In fact, the man had mistakenly posted a message meant for his beloved in the team group, sparking the whole commotion. To appease Mr. Daegu, Hari wrote an apology letter, but it didn't help much, as he still complained about her to President Kang. To make up for the embarrassment, the couple invited the team out for drinks that night, covering the expenses. By chance, they ran into Tae-moo in the elevator, and he joined them. To help everyone relax around the president, the team leaders prepared a soju bomb, leaving the 4 members tipsy, except for President Kang. Ms. Kim even noticed Hari and Tae-moo holding hands under the table. Although it wasn't a lie, the leaders pretended she was talking nonsense, as she also began mentioning their secret workplace relationship. Meanwhile, Young Seo was once again summoned by her cousin to discuss relationships. However, Sung-hoon was waiting for her at a restaurant to introduce her to his mother. When she arrived, Yoo-jung accompanied her, not wanting to be alone. At that moment, the damage was done. The two discovered they were in love with the same man, with his mother caught in the middle of the situation. Young Seo left the establishment, upset, and told Sung-hoon he could have informed her from the start. Things worsened when she realized he had lied about who was at his apartment. Young Seo advised Sung-hoon to start standing up for himself regarding President Kang's requests, rather than simply accepting them. With that, she left. Returning to the drinking session, the night ended after Ms. Kim insisted on the story of Tae-moo and the protagonist holding hands. This left the couple alone outside the establishment, just as the elder passed by. Curious about the woman his grandson was secretly seeing, he got out of the car and approached them. Imagine his surprise upon discovering it was Hari. Fortunately, the rest of the team returned, having forgotten their phones inside. This allowed President Kang to explain that they weren't on a date but rather at a colleague's drinking session. At home, Tae-moo faced his grandfather's interrogation. The elder stated he knew his grandson was seeing someone and hoped he wasn't afraid to introduce her for fear of disapproval. This seemed to reassure President Kang, who replied that he would introduce her soon, needing just a bit more time. In the next scene, we see that the protagonist's parents are going to a funeral and intend to spend the day away from home, which means they won't be opening the restaurant, and Ha-min, who was planning to go out with some friends, asks his mother to borrow some money, who promptly denies it. So the boy doesn't fail to show up for his appointment, and to do so, he takes what's left in the cash register. Meanwhile, Hari goes to her friend's apartment to help her with a cockroach and learns about the fight between her and her boyfriend. Then the two decide to eat some dumplings and go to a nearby establishment. On the way there, the friends see Tae-moo and Sung-hoon getting into President Kang's car, so Young Seo, already thinking the worst, that they were going to have a good time, calls a cab for the girls to follow them. It turns out that they went to an orphanage, which will later be shown to be the place where Sung-hoon spent most of her childhood. And since Young Seo wasn't introduced to her mother the day before because of all the confusion, the man takes the opportunity to do so now. Afterwards, the lady and the woman go to talk separately from the rest and end up getting on very well. Even Sung-hoon's mother says she understands why Young Seo left like that and is happy that they have now sorted themselves out. Sung-hoon was 5 years old when he arrived at the orphanage, and he stayed there until he started elementary school. And since Taemu's parents were always present at the place, making donations and campaigns, it was thanks to this connection that Sung-hoon went to live with Taemu and his grandfather. Young Seo and Sung-hoon sit down to talk later, as they still need to settle things, and now that the dust has settled, it's all quiet between the couple who still have a lot to discover about each other. However, Hari receives a call from a delivery man at her family's restaurant. He tells her that when he was dropping off some orders, he saw her brother taking money from the till and then the boy ran off, so the four of them go to the place to find out more. When they look at the security cameras, this is indeed what happened, and now Ha-min isn't answering his cell phone. However, another problem arises when a customer comes through the front door with a group of ladies who are making tracts asking to be served, and as President Kang has taken the lead in saying that they will serve them, everyone gets to work. And at the end of the surprise workday, Taemu ends up apologizing to young Seo for having sent Sung-hoon in his place on a blind date with her cousin. Later, when the four of them finally go to dinner, something unexpected happens to Taemu. When the protagonist went to open his soda, it turned out to be full of pressure and the liquid gushed all over his lover, so the two of them went to her house so that he could borrow one of Hari's brother's clothes. And while the man was changing, the protagonist's parents arrived at the establishment earlier than agreed, so young Seo, who is a very good friend, rolled them both up and told Hari to hide President Kang in her room in time for everyone to enter the house. The excuse young Seo used was Sung-hoon, the woman introduced him as her boyfriend, so everyone overlooked the strange way she was acting. In the end, the protagonist's parents invited the girls and Sung-hoon out for a drink, and as Hari realized that the meeting wasn't going to end anytime soon, the first chance she got to take Taemu out, she did. However, the two ended up being spotted by Ha-min, who at first tried to play the protective man of his sister, but after learning that her boyfriend is the president of the company, the boy quickly became meek. And of course, after Taemu left, Hari asked the youngest to keep their relationship a secret. The next day, when he's at the gym, Sung-hoon notices that his girlfriend has arrived all cheerful to do her workout, and we discover that she's like that after the man looks at the video she's watching. It turns out that in order for Taemu to be forgiven, he bribed her with a recording of Sung-hoon crying while looking at a photo of her while drunk, saying how much he missed her. And while the couple were fighting over who got the phone, someone who was watching took a picture of them. We then see that this is the work of young Seo's father. And Hari received an invitation that surprised her. URA asked her to meet her at an establishment near the protagonist's house, and when the two started talking, we discovered a lot. It seems that 7 years ago, when Hari became aware of her feelings for Min-woo, she first talked to URA about it, and although the woman had no interest in him, she only chose to stay with him so that the protagonist wouldn't have him. And in these comings and goings of the couple, in one of them URA cheated on him with another guy that Min-woo didn't even know about, so she questions why Hari didn't tell him, and our protagonist's answer was that she didn't want to further destroy the life of the man who was already suffering from the end of his relationship. This last part, Min-woo heard because he had entered the establishment and Hari decided to leave. Now instead of the man dealing with the situation with his girlfriend, he went after the protagonist, who told him that the way he was acting was affecting URA, that's why she was out of her mind, and that it was all his fault. The next day, after work, Hari and Taemu go out on a date, but as it starts to rain and the protagonist knows that he has something to do with rainy days and his parents' accident, she does everything she can to make the man relax, and it works. But at the end of the meeting, President Kang reveals that he has already understood that his beloved knows about his trauma and comments that he has always wanted to tell her, but has never found the courage to do so. Hari shows her boyfriend that he can be calm about the matter and then hugs him. Soon the two say goodbye, and while Taemu goes home happy, Hari meets someone who can change the future of their relationship. It turns out that President Kang's grandfather has found out about their relationship and has asked the protagonist to meet him alone. Summing up the conversation, Hari was able to tell him about the beginning, and before he could talk about the couple's current situation, he received a call that Taemu was in hospital. President Kang found out about their meeting on the way home and, nervous about what his grandfather might say to his beloved, he was heading towards the establishment they were in when he crashed his car. The man goes to the hospital and soon afterwards Hari also arrives, which makes him angry because he has already warned the woman to stay away from his grandson. However, in this situation, the protagonist slams on the brakes and when she sees Taemu all right, he just has a bruised arm, she says she's leaving. But at that moment, President Kang shows his grandfather that they really are together and that he's not going to give up on Hari that easily. Later, when it's just the two of them in the room with Sung-hoon, Taemu tells his grandfather that he was the one who made Hari sign a dating contract and that, as far as the lying thing is concerned, if you want to blame anyone, it has to be your grandson. The protagonist, on the other hand, was on her way home with Young Seo's ride, but her friend drove her back to the hospital at Hari's request, after she saw that it was raining again and was worried about President Kang's well-being. When she arrives at Taemu's room, the man is looking out of the window and even shows her a tower that looks like a Christmas tree if you have a little imagination. During their conversation, Taemu tells him about his parents' accident, which he still blames himself for. It turned out to be his birthday and the boy didn't want them to leave, so while he stayed with his grandfather and received calls from his mother, he kept rushing them to come faster and faster. The boy's father, wanting to see his son soon, sped off in a car in heavy rain that didn't allow him to see much in front of the headlights, and so the accident happened and they lost their lives. The grandfather went with the boy to the scene and even tried to cover the little one's eyes, but it's something that remains in his memory. And after this difficult account, Hari comments that if that were the logic, he should blame her for his accident today, and as the man says he will never do that, she explains that his parents don't resent him either. The next day, Young Seo meets up with her friend to give her the phone she had forgotten in her car and to lend her support for the bomb that was about to explode. URA has gone crazy, she commented in that video of Min Woo with the protagonist that she and the man would make a great couple, that even Hari liked him for 7 years, but to attract more attention she threw the secret of her relationship with President Kang on the internet and there were photos as proof, the ones she took on the boat when they met at the hotel. Soon, everyone in the company believes that Chairman Kang was betrayed by Hari with Min Woo and they start to talk about it. The protagonist's team is also affected, as the project they were leading with great success has been passed on to 2 other teams of researchers, so that Hari's name isn't further linked to Min Woo's, and now she's beginning to realize that everyone around her will also suffer the consequences. Despite this, her superiors defend her from the others and Hari is extremely grateful to them. Young Seo, on the other hand, so that the protagonist's parents wouldn't find out about her affair with Taemu, ended up footing the bill for all the evening's customers and controlling the information that reached them. That's why Hari recognizes and values her best friends so much. The next day, Young Seo is in the parking lot of her apartment building with her boyfriend when they are surprised by the presence of her father. The man is known for disapproving of his daughter's relationships and in most cases, he offers the men money to get away from her. However, the woman's father invites the couple to dinner tonight so that he can get to know Sung-hoon better. And at Hari's work, she is also surprised when President Kang's grandfather calls her into his office to talk. The man suggests that she go and work at the production plant for a while, until the rumors die down, and as the protagonist says that there will be nothing for a researcher to do there, he comments that she should resign. But as an act of courage, we see Hari defending her profession, saying that she won't do that under any circumstances, and then she leaves the company to wander the streets and think about her current situation. Meanwhile, Taemu found out about the rumors from some nurses at the hospital and immediately charged Sung-hoon for not telling him anything, after which he got dressed and went to the company to support his girlfriend. However, the woman was no longer there and Chairman Kang came across her grandfather in his office, who told him about the proposal he had made to her. Taemu's only reply to him was that it was all his fault and that if he had to give up the company because of the rumors, there was no problem with that, but that he shouldn't dare try to fire her again. Afterwards, President Kang went to the business of the protagonist's parents and didn't find her there, but Ha-min was there and Tae-moo asked him to borrow his cell phone, as his was damaged in the accident. Hari's parents overheard him calling Ha-min his brother-in-law and went to ask him about it, at which point they found out about their daughter's relationship and that Tae-moo is president of the company where she works. However, to the fright of his angry future mother-in-law, the man got into his car and drove off with his brother-in-law's cell phone, which he used to continue chasing his girlfriend who had simply disappeared. Meanwhile, Young Seo and Sung-hoon meet her father, who surprises her when he comments that if her boyfriend becomes his son-in-law, he could inherit the family business, and for the first time, the woman believes that he has approved of the person she has chosen. After the meeting, Young Seo finds an engagement ring in the glove compartment of Sung-hoon's car, and when he questions him, the man stops the car and officially proposes, since the woman has commented that she would like to marry him and they are very cute. However, when they go to celebrate at home, Sung-hoon receives a call from the woman's father when she is with him and the two of them hear together that everything was a farce at dinner. The gentleman wants Sung-hoon to stay away from his daughter and their joy is interrupted by this news. Tae-moo discovers that Hari is in front of that tower that looks like a Christmas tree and goes there to find her, where the man comforts her and then the two of them go to a hotel room to do it. The next day is Young Seo's birthday and, as usual, she goes to celebrate with the protagonist's family and this year Sung-hoon accompanies her. Tae-moo also attends the celebration, because when he went to dump Hari, her parents saw them and now they want to get to know him better. Over the course of the day, President Kang won over his future mother-in-law, but he had to try a little harder when it came to his beloved's father, as the man felt that he was a little cowed. So at one point, when the gentleman went to the family establishment, Tae-moo went after him and said he understood that the gentleman was angry with him, but at that moment the man explained that that wasn't what he was feeling. In fact, Hari's parents were never able to do much for her hobbies, such as singing, which she is very good at, because they couldn't afford it, and now he's afraid that people will compare her to her parents because she's with someone from a very high class like Tae-moo. He knows that the protagonist will feel bad about this, which has become his biggest worry. Tae-moo replies that although he can't block out all the attention she will receive, he promises that he will stand by his beloved and protect her with everything he has. And so President Kang's future father-in-law is reassured. Young Seo, on the other hand, had to deal with her father on her birthday. The woman went to him to hand in her letter of resignation and let him know that she will no longer use the man's surname, as she no longer wants him in her life, since he never saw her as his daughter, but rather as something that belongs to him. The next day, Tae-moo learned about the transfer of the project from Hari's team to the others, so he took action and made them finish what they had started, which is the right thing to do. And the protagonist received an apology from URA through Min-woo, who asked to meet her in a coffee shop. The man regrets everything he has caused his friend and tells her that he is closing his restaurant to spend some time in Europe. The couple have decided to end their relationship and he hopes that when he returns, he will be able to resume his friendship with Hari. Later, when Tae-moo and Hari were at work together, the man received a call from a friend of his grandfather's, telling him that the man was in hospital, and before he could start to despair, President Kang heard in the background that the man was pretending so that his grandson would get scared and break up with the protagonist. That way, Hari comments that she can go to the hospital and get into Dagu's mood. She can convince him to like her again, like she did the first time when she pretended to be someone else, and that's what the woman tries to do by spending the rest of the day with the gentleman. It worked for a while. The gentleman realized Hari's gift for singing, but he didn't say he accepted her. Meanwhile, Sung-hoon prepared a dinner to celebrate his beloved's birthday, which they hadn't been able to do alone the day before, and the woman got emotional. Young Seo says that she thought she would feel good about not seeing her father in her life anymore, but it's hurting a lot and she's going to make an effort to be better for her fiancé, so that he doesn't let greed blind him like it did his family. Later, Young Seo, who is now unemployed, says that she's going to try to follow her dream of starting her own company, and Sung-hoon is the first to invest in it, with a large sum of money that he has saved up, and he jokes that she'll also have to send him a business plan. Returning to Hari, in the end it's a good thing that Daegu went to the hospital and did that scene, because when he did all those tests to scare his grandson, the man discovered that he has a heart vessel disease that can't be treated in Korea. So Sung-hoon and Tae-moo start spending more time with the man until they figure out what to do. In the next scene, we see President Kang talking to the protagonist. He comments that his grandfather's treatment can only be found in the United States and that's why he's going there with him. Tae-moo invites Hari to join them, but the woman declines the invitation and explains that her decision is because she doesn't want Daegu to be stressed by her presence. Also, the man will be spending more time with him and she doesn't want to steal the attention that should now be directed to her grandfather. So the couple agree that they will continue their relationship and overcome all this together, even if they spend some time away from each other. After a year, we see that Tae-moo is still abroad, but their relationship is still going, well, we'll see for how long. It has come to light on a gossip site that the man is in a relationship with a musician, and as soon as the story reaches the protagonist, she decides to take her pending vacation and travel to the place. However, when Hari is putting her suitcase in the cab, she is surprised by her lover getting out of it, and we discover that the man came back a week before his grandfather, because he missed his girlfriend. At first, the man's treatment is finally over and they can return to the country for good. And as for the gossip, that's all it was, a rumor. Tae-moo didn't come empty-handed, and with his grandfather's blessing, he asked for Hari's hand in marriage, which she obviously accepted. What did you think of this season? I hope you enjoyed the summary. Leave your suggestions in the comments and subscribe. If you liked the video, like it and share it to help me. Until next time.